According to the clock.
Okay, I'll call this meeting of Capital Program Committee to order. Thursday, October 6th, a little bit after 10 a.m. This meeting is being audio video recorded. Please be aware anything you say or broadcast on the Zoom will be on the town's YouTube. Our meeting is being conducted pursuant to Massachusetts law for hybrid in-person video meetings. Are there any members of the public? No public comment. Can I get a motion to approve? Terry, let me do roll call. Peter Kaiser, Jill Veith, Richard Hussey, myself. Online, we have Barry Rector. Welcome, Barry.
Well,
And you're a little bit frozen.
on the steamship right now. So
Gotcha. Okay, hang in there if you can. You're our quorum. Oh, no, actually, we've got it here. Public comment we don't have. Can I get a motion to hold July 14th minutes and approve September 29th minutes? Okay, on your motion, Richard. Jill?
Can I say something about it? Actually, I felt like the minutes, I'm not saying they didn't reflect the discussion, but I didn't think it had everything in there, I guess.
Yeah, so just technically under Robert's rules, can I get a second on the motion?
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I motioned also, so that's technically.
Okay, so a second, just because technically discussion comes if you second.
Sorry.
Yeah, I understand your point. I want to review them. I thought I made some modifications. You know, as a practical matter, the minutes aren't, you know, having spoken with Terry about this over the years, the minutes aren't going to reflect everything. But if there are some particular points that a member felt was important and they wanted to revise or propose a revision to the minutes, that's why we have an opportunity to review them. So your point is taken and we'll have an opportunity to review those.
Might I say something on that real quick?
Please, Terry, feel free.
There is supposed to be a process on submitting changes, excuse me, that Jill, any individual, if you want to propose changes, you should send them to staff and then they can compile them so that I'm not getting duplicate requests and trying to sort it out. They compile it, put it in, either throw it into the minutes or send me an email stating these are the requested changes. So that is the proper process.
Okay.
And if something is then still missed, you know, smaller items such, then the minutes, of course, can be approved as amended at the meeting.
Okay.
Right. So
Alrighty.
thank you, Terry.
So do you want to hold those and?
So the 14th we're holding and the 29th, unless someone wants to hold the minutes of the 29th too. Is that the one you were commenting on?
Mhm.
Okay, so why don't we just vote on the motion or no to dispense with it, and then we'll have a motion to hold it. Okay, so once again, on your motion,
I'm gonna vote no.
Jill,
No,
Peter,
sorry.
Barry.
It's okay.
Oh, we lost Barry, thank you. And I'm a no. A motion's a hold for review.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, we'll just go through. Richard,
I'll
on your
move
motion.
that.
Oh,
Aye.
I'm sorry. Do we not have any members online? So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, none, carries unanimously.
Oh, Art's on.
He's not a member.
No, I know. I'm sorry. I was just.
Yeah, there's no members online, Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
thank you.
at this point.
Yeah, there's Barry
There's
trying to get back in
There's
by the
back.
looks of it.
It doesn't look like we're gonna have, well, two questions. One question. Is anybody have to leave at a particular time this morning?
I need to
11:30 is probably the latest I can stay here, but
11:30.
Okay, no, not
Yeah.
plenty of time. If we were gonna lose a quorum, we need to have a discussion of number 9. Okay, so then we're just gonna proceed with the presentation of the FY 24 preliminary capital improvement plan update. Boy, I gotta have a cup of coffee this morning.
Me too, actually.
There should be a little machine here. Brian, Sue, who would like to take that?
Do we want to, I'm trying to figure out how we can, do you want me to share it on the screen?
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
So could we do one thing, Mr. Chair?
Please.
I know that the airport is here to, I think, talk about additional information. I only received it, I think, either Tuesday of this week, and I have the auditor, so I have not had a chance to send it to you. Noah did, the assistant airport manager did write a letter outlining answers to the questions that you had asked at last week's meeting. And I think that, Tom, are you on to discuss the letter with the committee?
Just if they have any questions, again, apparently we missed a meeting last year and we didn't want to do that again this year, so I want to make
They
sure.
haven't, I actually have not had, because we have the auditors here, I've not had time to forward that to them, so they don't have it. So I don't think they would have questions on that because they haven't
That's
seen it.
fine. Just here to listen, thanks.
Okay. Just to get that, just in case, Mr. Chair.
So we should anticipate a letter
You
on what
get-
subject matter?
The answers to the questions you asked last week's meeting about the housing request for capital.
Okay, good. And
They responded with a letter from the assistant airport director.
okay, and so just to close the loop on that, subsequent to that discussion amongst ourselves and with Brian, we had a discussion about revenues. In my spare time, I looked into that. Clearly, anything that is a tax has restrictions. It has to be for on property and FAA severely restricted, as are any revenues from funding that derive from a funding source that the FAA provided. However, there is not a wide latitude, but my reading of the Federal Register is that's of, like too many pages. Is that there is perhaps an opportunity for expenditures off airport property, subject to it being airport. It has to be directly related to the mission. It's not just a rational nexus. It's a specific relation, such as an operating cost, such as perhaps employee housing. So we have discussed that. I'm not an expert on it. I don't pretend to be, but it is an important topic. So I did do a little bit of research on it. Obviously, Brian, if you find something, or Tom, you're here, I don't want to disregard you, but we didn't put it on the agenda to discuss, so I'm just making a commissioner comment. If you have information that you can point to in the register or otherwise, we're happy to receive that. It's not, we're not looking for to create a bone of contention. We're just looking for information for our decision making. Other than that, we'll anticipate the letter and then let's put airport on the agenda for the next meeting. I'm sorry, I don't recall, who do we have at our next review?
We have sewer, so that might be a little.
Yeah, that one's gonna be a little bit heavy, so maybe, and the next one is DPW. Let's take a look offline, we'll take a look at that, at the schedule and see when we can fit them in. I don't want it to just wait and wait, but.
And I will, we'll send that today to the
Okay.
committee so you have it. And then Tom, we'll talk once we finalize the date to have the follow-up discussion, if that works for you.
Sure, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tom. We appreciate that quick turnaround on the information too.
And I think I can find some other information on airport revenue diversion. It's pretty concise.
Okay, yeah, that'd be wonderful. Just put like one way or the other, we can just put it to bed. That would be good.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so Brian, we'll go back to the presentation if you want.
So we're gonna start on the progress update, which we discussed with the board. As the committee's aware, on August 15th, we gave an update to the Select Board, Finance Committee, and Capital Program chairs, town manager, and the staff that she utilizes to review and prioritize projects is nearing completion. There's a few things that we were looking through to finalize our review and prioritization. There continues to be some refinements to general fund and enterprise requests, which we'll discuss one of those refinements today under another agenda item. The capital program committee obviously is still reviewing and meeting and discussing with departments, so your review is still in progress. Overall, we have seen a fairly significant improvements in the majority of the departments and what they're providing for documentation. Town management, we have a meeting today on a couple more departments, has started to undertake a review of all the prior year projects with departments. We're actually looking, the focus for us in this is all requests that were from annual 2020 town meeting and backwards to try to identify projects that haven't started, and if they're going to start, if they make sense anymore. If they don't make sense, what type of funding was authorized, and is there an opportunity to reappropriate it to one, either a project that might need supplemental funding and or a project that is in this cycle that may get a favorable recommendation. We'll talk about the enhancements at another agenda item, but Sue and I did have an extensive conversation with Plum about their ability to help us with the report, and we'll provide more information at that agenda item, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So here we're just kind of giving an overview of what is actually in that town administration has been reviewing. Some of this you've already seen from various departments, some of it have not come forward before you. We have the townwide document management system. We're continuing that path in progress to get to digitize the town records. The request this year is for $500,000. Consistent with the start of last year with coastal resiliency planning, where we've put in another $1 million into the request for this year. We've left the island-wide underground wiring feasibility study in at the $500,000. I do believe that this might actually change a little bit. We've had discussions about potentially picking one area and doing a more focused study on what it would take for one particular area rather than island-wide, because island-wide, I'm not entirely sure would be able to be accomplished, but we may be able to do a smaller feasibility study in areas that may be able to be done. 50,000 for the electric charging stations to continue providing that service to the community. It's a request from the energy coordinator. Paid parking infrastructure and installation. This is really kind of a placeholder still at this point. If the community may be aware that the board did have a rather extensive discussion last week at its regularly scheduled meeting. We've left some money in at this point. We're still trying to get a handle on what the intention is to move forward. There was discussion about only moving forward with a parking commission potentially for next year, get that implemented and then start it at a date after that. But we have left funding in as we sort through exactly where the board stands on that. And then the town administration hybrid vehicle is approaching, I think, 10 or 11 years old and should be replaced on a schedule. So they have put in a request for a replacement vehicle for 50,000, and consistent with the town's policy, they would be looking at either hybrid or electric first. Public safety. I think we have gone through the majority of this. The rescue equipment project is 375,000, replacement of engine 1 for 850,000, fire department vehicle for 80,000, and I think Sue passed out is that the fire department sheet that was passed out? There's an addition on here, which is a refinement after talking to not only the new fire chief, but the interim chief, and I believe members of the fire department as well. As you remember, over the last 4 years, we've allocated about $100,000 a year to replace the self-contained breathing apparatuses. This is a portable refill trailer that could be brought to the scene of an emergency. Right now, if we had a situation where they expended all of the air in their tank itself, we would have to go back to refill them. And the thought is that this would be a much more, given the fact that we've invested so much money and time is of the essence, having the trailer that could refill them on site is something that is very critical and we think is important. So we have put that in as a late breaking item into the capital plan. And that's estimated at $225,000. Marine Department, Pulpus and Mattakit Harbors for the permitting, planning and dredging, 550,000. And then the police department had no other capital requests. DPW, I know that we really haven't gone through anything, and I think they're in another week or two. There's a placeholder for Washington Street parking lot reconstruction. It's in as $2 million, but we're still going through discussions with the DPW director on what that reconstruction looks like. So we've put a placeholder in based on his understanding of the cost right now. It may be around $2 million. Security cameras and lighting. There's a request from the Parks and Rec director to include some money for security cameras and lighting at the various town-owned facilities such as Children's Beach and jetties and the like. Transportation, replace the fuel tank at the DPW, $375,000. Continuation of the sidewalk improvement plan, which is, was in the strategic plan, for $1,125,000. There's a request for $3 million for annual roadwide improvements. This is a number that we'll continue to review and try to figure a number that we would supplement, that we would be able to, you'd recommend in conjunction with the annual Chapter 90 roadway allocation. And then we have Millie's Bridge abutment stabilization and dune restoration for $1 million. Continuation of multi-use path maintenance request for $1 million. And then cobblestone improvements, continue the program of cobblestone replacements. I'm sorry about that. $550,000. And then continuing the work on Sconset Footbridge. If you recall, we had a report from Vertex on the structural stability of the bridge, and this 100,000 would continue to make recommended repairs to the bridge. Then the largest item here, which will be coming for you, and I'm sure we'll have lengthy discussion about, is the supplemental funding, because we already do have some funding for the continuation of the Surfside area roads reconstruction, which includes Lover's Lane, Monahanset, and Orkwa. $13 million is the cost estimate for supplemental funding that we need to complete or continue and complete the entirety of that project. Continuing with Public Works, the Nobody or soccer field additions and expansions for, actually as part of the recommendation from the Parks Master Plan, 3.8 million. Hazard mitigation and general and natural resources. $4 million for dredging, design, permitting, and dredging work associated with Maya Comet. And $100,000 for the continuation of the harbor's HMP implementation. Natural Resources has requested $500,000 for the continuation of the baseline environmental data program. Moving to IT, which I think we have already had a presentation by the IT, the Chief Technology Officer. $50,000 to maintain their work for network infrastructure, and $69,000 to continue the cycle of replacing town computers. All told, with the addition, preliminary requests total in general fund $37.4 million. Approved requests last year, all totaled, including all the individual debt exclusion articles, were $69,250,000. The largest items inclusive in this being the 13 million for Surfside area roads, the 4 million for Maya Comet, and 3.8 for Noble Pier. Airport, the 5.1 million for the housing development, phase 2, the construction cost. Paint and beads, which were discussed with you at the meeting last week, 503,000. The terminal improvements funded by an AIP project, supplemental funding 9 million. The runway 24 high-speed exit, 5 million. South Apron expansion, supplemental funding, which is an AIP project, 22.6 million. Perimeter road and fence relocation, which is also an AIP project, 1 million. EV charging infrastructure, 1.2 million. Exterior painting of the Jet A fuel tank, 96,000. Replace airport 15, repairing parking lot and the luggage carts, which, if you recall, the documentation is multiple projects for 110,000. The Letco tug for 384,000, and the ARF tools and equipment and PFAS decontamination, excuse me, sorry about that, 392. Ireland Home, I believe, has also been presented to you, and they've requested the replacement of the van that they have, and that's 175,000, and we would be able to trade the old van in. Sewer and stormwater, which will be coming to you. There has been a renewed focus on stormwater, and so most likely we will be creating and my recommendation is to create an enterprise fund to handle stormwater, which is why we've broken it out into a separate component in the capital plan. Continuation of good work for the capacity management, operations and maintenance program that David and his staff undertake on an annual basis. So continued request for the 2 million. Surfside wastewater treatment facility upgrade phase 2. We already have approximately $9 million allocated over a couple of annual town meetings. We've had a preliminary design as part, or cost estimate as part of the scoping project that Weston and Sampson has undertaken. And the request is for an additional 7 million to complete, to be able to put that project out to bid and get the work to commence. I will let the committee know that we are on the intended use plan for SRF funding for that project, so it would be at a low, it'd be at a 2% or less loan, potentially 0 if we can fit into all the categories for that. Electric administration vehicle, 50,000. The purchase of a replacement F-550 dump truck, 115,000, and a new F-350 for 85,000. In the stormwater component, we've put in $1 million to do reconstruction improvement at the Silver Street parking lot, which most people will really, I'm not sure everybody's aware, but during periods of high rainfall, the parking lot becomes essentially a large swimming pool in some areas. So the thought is that we can potentially do that as even part of the force main project, but we would need the supplemental funding because the force main project is going right through that by that area. So that request is for $1 million. Island-wide drainage improvements, 1.1 million. And we would like to potentially institute a very similar program to the CMON program that we're using in sewer for stormwater, and that's $2 million request. Want to comment and solid waste. So the lead service replacement program for the pipes, 1.1 million. Water tank recoating and the replacement, which I believe Mark has already presented to you, 2.2 million. Employee housing at the 43 Pulpus Road site, 2 million. And the pipe and equipment storage, which Sue and myself did discuss with you, I think last week, being brought forward, 950,000. The landfill closure under solid waste. We have an opinion of cost from Waste Options at 19 million, which has been reviewed by Weston and Sampson, who is we're using as an owner's project representative for that project. They have reviewed the cost and do concur that it is within reasonable at this point in time, based on our understanding of what we have to do. I believe it was 2 town meetings ago, we allocated $14 million for the project because that was the original estimate. And so this is supplemental funding to be able to complete that closure when we have to. Purchase of a new staff vehicle, 50,000. A request to implement a third baler in the MRF facility for 380,000. A second scale at the transfer at the scale house for 210,000. And certainly I think that this probably makes a lot of sense given the length of the lines that sometimes back up during the summer, and we may be able to operate 2 scales, but also have one in the event that the scale that is currently in use needs to be taken down for repairs or what have you. And then various paving and stormwater improvements on the facility at the site itself is projected to be 500,000. All told, the preliminary request in the enterprise is 71.5 million. Fiscal 23, we approved $13.4 million for the projects. The large scale projects there include 22.7 for South Apron expansion, 9 million for terminal improvements, 7 million for the upgrade of the Surfside wastewater treatment facility, 5.1 million for the housing development phase 2, and then supplemental funding for the landfill at 5 million. The town manager and I have had very, very preliminary discussions on potential debt exclusions. Last year, we had a substantial number of them here. The Surfside area roads would obviously be at the top of the list because 13 million would be very difficult for the town to fund within the levy capacity on a debt service basis. Landfill closure, the first 14 million was debt excluded, so we would recommend the second portion be a debt exclusion as well. Myacomet pond dredging, 4 million, and nobody or soccer field at 3.8 million.
Isn't that already built?
No, that's the
Expansion.
expansion. The
Oh,
field.
it's the expansion.
It's the
It's
expansion, yeah.
Nothing to do with what's built now.
And as we look to the future, we tried to look at some of the out year projects and just identify a few of them. 50 million for Island Home construction, a consolidated municipal office building, 56 million. The intermodal transportation center, 23 million. That is still, this is a placeholder that still has numerous hurdles and discussions to go through. So this could be pushed out even farther potentially. I think it's everyone's favorite topic and it generated some discussion at the meeting last night. The
Mhm.
auxiliary building for the public safety department is $5 million now. A new senior center, 30 million. Public Works campus construction, 18 million. Sconset Fire Station, 7.8 million. Parks and Recs master plan, the continuation of everything except what is included in this year's request would be 22.5 million. And 50 million has been slated for the potential need for a new public school. Some of the unknowns I think that we have discussed with the committee at various points, but we've internally been discussing. One of the big unknowns that may affect some of the prioritization of some of this is what the comprehensive plan for Baxter Road relocation may look like. As you all recall, Arcadis is doing some work on that for us now. That most likely will be a very expensive project to undertake at some point in the future. We have allocated already about 2.7 million for PFAS remediation, but as we're all aware, the scope still remains a little bit of an unknown, so that could have a continued impact on the plan as we move forward. One of the unknowns that we're still faced with is a decision: do we remain in Mattocket with the Deep Public Works campus, or do we relocate it? And if we do relocate it, what does that look like, and where does it get relocated to? Financial impact of the new project recommendations from the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee. None of those have been factored in at this point. We have put in $1 million for coastal resiliency, but not a majority of those have plans or projects have not been envisioned into this current CIP. And we did put in the last slide about the 22.5 for Parks and Rec master plan. One possible unknown is what revisions may be due to the plan as a result of coastal resiliency planning and other island projects that may be undertaken.
When was that plan revealed? Sorry, I think a while ago.
I'd have to go back. I don't recall off the top of my head. Joe.
It's on the website.
It is, yes. The next step, town administration is slowly beginning the work of determining the funding sources. We'll have more clarity, probably most likely by the end of October, when free cash and retained earnings will be certified. Continued work with the capital program committee, the Rorys, to develop the report and the recommendations, and then continued discussions with the select board, FinCom, and ultimately review of your committee's recommendations, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
And I'm happy to take any questions or have any discussions that the committee feels warranted.
Sure. So I think just to direct the discussion on that, if anyone has any discussion or questions on a higher level, we'll get into, obviously, for our dedicated and not so dedicated viewers at home, Capcom will be reviewing each of these requests that hasn't reviewed already, and in all instances receive typically detailed background information to substantiate the numbers and the rationale for them. So with that, I guess I'm looking for, overall kind of overview comments from 1,000 feet up, if any.
I mean, I have comments on specific items.
Yeah, we're
Once we
not.
go through them like
yeah,
that, it's like,
No,
eh,
No, I
we'll
know,
review
I
those
know.
with the department head.
Yeah.
That's
Even
fair.
ones we
Well,
already
actually,
had,
can we
but-
go to the big number
Yeah, or if
for the
you,
enterprise fund?
if for instance, you would like to have more information provided on a particular request, if it hasn't come before us, or you think there may be some information that you would like to have included that may not be included, that's the type of discussion I think is appropriate at this point, without the department head here.
I'm just curious, when Parks and Rec starts making requests, are they gonna be under their own headline, or are they gonna be nested under DPW or somebody else? Obviously, we don't have any requests from them yet today, do we?
Well, we have just, which is located in DPW general, you have the 50,000 for security and the cameras for
Okay.
various locations around the island, say Children's Beach.
For Parks and Rec.
Right, for
Gotcha.
Parks and Rec.
Okay, so there are some that are technically
And
Parks and
then,
Rec.
and then the 3.8 million requested for the expansion of
The-
the playing fields is Parks and Rec. And I think it might be useful in the capital program committee presentation, maybe to create a department and break them out individually,
Or
but
asterisks or something,
Yeah.
just to, because obviously they're gonna start having more and
more
more once
requests as
the
they come.
master plan is being implemented with improvements and.
I mean, they are a within the accounting system, they are a separate department entity in our accounting. So
Which kind of just happened again, you know, in the last couple of years.
it
they
happened last year when
reestablished.
we reestablished the staffing within them. So
Got it.
that's correct.
Christie, please.
Brian, you mentioned about stormwater. Is sewer gonna absorb that? And is that gonna require any additional staff?
Yes and yes, I think. So I think the plan is that my recommendation to town administration has been that we create an enterprise fund separate and distinct for stormwater, which we're lawfully allowed to do under the statutes. I think that the plan is that sewer will be heavily involved in the operation of stormwater, but it will require staff. It will require the additional staff, most likely a stormwater manager and operational staff. The goal is that eventually the goal in the beginning with the ramping up of the program is that we would put out a CCTV camera contract to an entity. There's a few entities that have done work on the island before for that work. And it would be done similar to the way sewer currently does it. And put out a yearly contract and they do camera work, and then with Hazen and Sawyer's assistance, they review the video of the camera, they review the recordings, they make an analysis of what they see, and then the recommendation for, you know, repairs to pipe, either, you know, out of the last report for the sewer was when the sewer department undertook a big process to reline a vast majority of the piping that they have in the ground. So the envisionment is that we would eventually start with that and then move to having staff to be able to do catch basin cleanings and do a lot of that work, but starting with most likely contract basis and moving into some number of employees. What that looks like at this point is still in development.
Thank you. Any others?
Just follow on that, as an enterprise fund, where would their revenues be generated?
They would be generated from a very nice subsidy from the general fund.
Got it. Okay. So no stormwater. fee
There's a
paid for
possibility that we
sewer.
would be able to do some type of revenue fees in the future, but I think in the initial phase, it would merely be a transfer from the general fund.
Other questions or comments? Okay, I got a handful. Obviously, we've got the self-contained, the SCBA's trailer on as a separate agenda item. Brian, is the intention that you're gonna get into that in detail? Or is that something you're thinking we'll do at a later meeting?
I think what we were gonna do, and I did it in this presentation, I think we are not gonna get into a great depth of the detail. It was more a presentation that it's coming forward and that town administration does support its inclusion.
Mhm.
And that we would schedule a meeting in one of the flex meetings to have the fire chief come in and give a better update on why it makes the most sense.
Okay, so on that item, Sue, if you would please note, I think what we should do is both with respect to that item and the airport, so as to alleviate any scheduling issues and certainly any sense of apprehension, that we would address both of those during our next flex meeting.
Is that okay with you? Is that work for you?
Yeah.
Committee, okay.
Yeah. On the general fund, Surfside area roads reconstruction, Lovers Lane, Monahasset, Opera. You know, obviously, we're gonna look for, I'm forecasting on these next comments. We'll be looking for, and we'll see in the record some clarification of the supplemental. The supplemental is a full 13 million, or is this gross with this is what the FY 23 request will be?
That's what the request.
Or 24
rate.
reps.
That's
Okay.
the net needed to gross the entire project.
Okay.
With the available funding.
And then, thank you. On the road improvements, maintenance, island-wide, I think we've discussed this for a number of years. We would like to, I understand there's been transition and, you know, human resources churn, but we really think, I think we would really like to be getting into a look back list. If we're gonna be this and other items where we're funding kind of a category to have an idea of what the, you know, relevant, a breakdown of the relevant information.
Okay.
The streets, the square, you know, the overall footage, what the cost was. It's just a good metric. On the CMOM for stormwater, I presume we'll get a breakdown of, you know, what all that includes. I don't question the necessity of front loading information on what scopes of works will likely be as a good management practice. Just want to forecast, we'll be looking for some detail on that. The landfill closure, I'm sorry if I'm going too quick.
No, you're fine. I'm still able to keep up. I'll let you know.
All right, nice. The landfill closure, phase one, supplemental funding. It's been a while since we've talked about that topic. I think it would be helpful if we got just a kind of summary for certain, include a summary
Mhm.
of, it doesn't have to be overly detailed, but kind of where we were,
Mhm.
where we are now, where we intend to be.
Yep.
To the extent that that can be disclosed as a public matter. Public safety auxiliary building, I would just suggest that I just think to the extent that this cost on a dollar for use basis, this cost is increasing far and above what I think personally makes any sense. And I mean that with respect to, if we're gonna do it, let's please do it. So I would ask that town admin consider that. And finance department consider that perspective in your deliberations.
Just to point to that, Mr. Chair, I think it wasn't last year, but we have a couple occasions attempted to do it and have not been successful at the annual town meeting. So,
I know, but I think maybe we could bring up,
no, I
the cost. I think the wheeled stock, the example of the Wanna situation and the cost that they proposed. I think those should be taken into considerations. I could just ask that y'all take a look at
I'll
that.
bring that back to the town manager for discussion.
And then the last one was just with respect to this unknowns with potential SIP impact. I presume, so question for clarification, you're saying that these unknowns are within the next 10-year period.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I would like to
Well,
suggest,
with the exception of, I have no idea about Baxter Road, but
Well,
we know
yeah.
we'll have to do it, and that could be 15 years, but that's an unknown cost until
Sure.
we finalize the development of a plan.
or it could be 3.
It could be three, yeah.
Just with respect to the, thank you for that, with the Public Works campus improvements, I would like to get a better idea of like the decision-making process. I don't know that we necessarily need to do it.
Mhm.
Maybe we could do it at a flex after we get well into completing our current budget season or post issuance of our report. It's not like something that's burning a hole in anyone's list to
Okay.
complete, but I would like to get a little bit of information on that in consideration.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other thoughts?
Brian, can you remind me what, phase one for the, housing for the airport?
That was
was-
OPM and design work
Okay, do
and architectural work.
you remember the dollar?
1.1.
1.152 million, I believe.
Okay.
Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, but I
Yeah.
think it was 1.152 million.
That was funded last year?
Yes.
Okay,
And that's the plan we saw on the paper last week. Yeah. That's what,
That's the concept that you saw in the meeting.
yeah, I don't think we saw a complete plan of the plan, a representation of the plan. I think we saw just some of the information from whatever expenditure has been made on the 1.152.
okay, I was curious because it said they already had permitting for the priority habitat, so I don't know if they just got some blanket approval, but usually you have a plan before you get that approved.
Yeah, no, I'm saying we haven't seen like a package summary, to my belief, of like everything that the 1.152 represents. Maybe just tidbits of it.
Also, assuming all that hasn't been spent.
Yeah, because some of it hasn't been spent and, yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments at this point? All right. Outstanding items on the capital request. I think housekeeping is in order. Unless anyone can think of anything, I think something we'll pick up in the work group session on the report is where we are with where we need to be with tracking comments and footnotes. I just mentioned it now because it's one of the outstanding items for requests today. We'll get into it later in the session. Next item is discussion of potential new day and time for meetings. I think I'm just going to start the discussion since I put it on the agenda. Capcom is an important committee. I believe, you all think so. We've had already at least a couple of quorum issues. And hopeful that that relates to the day and time of the meeting. If not, then we need to take another look at, maybe we need an attendance policy. I'm not going to suggest a 3 and out type of a thing, but it's been suggested to me. So I realize people have a life and they, have other things to do, and I completely respect that. And I think that to the extent that the committee as a group can be responsive and subject to town calendaring and a place to meet, that we should be looking at that topic. Because if it is affecting attendance, I want to address it. I think we need to be proactive. So that's the bigger picture of it. The second picture for me is I'm looking at parking at this location, and I really find this forum, which is a little more relaxed, much more, I just think it's more workable, not so official in nature. I think that the parking at Fort Fairgrounds is much more appropriate for our needs. And the calendar is such, having reviewed it the last few weeks, that if we kept or moderately adjusted our schedule, say to 11 a.m. start versus 10 a.m. because it's closer to the lunch hour for people, it's not breaking up your morning, that it looks that we could meet there and not have parking issues. So I wanted to put that out there and then just get some thoughts from people. Okay.
I mean, I'll kick it off, and it might just be me, but it seems like every organization I'm involved with, for some reason, always wants to meet on Thursday. I've got a standing, first of the month.
Yeah.
One with the bank, another one that's different with the bank. I've got my other nonprofits typically want to meet Thursday evening, so not that that impacts this, but my, Thursday seems like the busiest day on my calendar, so this obviously adds to that. So I would be well open to another day of the week, probably not Friday, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't, that's just, again, me personally, and I know that we're not gonna be able to find a day that fits perfectly for everybody, but if anybody else has issues with Thursday, be certain that I'm also in that boat.
Okay.
I have like once a month crack, so that's my only, and that's also at 10
On Thursday.
on Tuesdays. So it's if you are gonna shift,
We shift.
for the sake of Peter's comment.
Richard, Joe.
That's-
I don't love Thursday, but that's, it's just getting towards the end of the week, but. My FinCom meetings, those don't really start, they're later in the afternoon and they won't start till closer to Christmas anyway, so.
I'm good.
Richard, you're good.
Whatever.
Is Barry with us?
He's been coming in and out.
So his meetings are on Mondays,
Yeah. Don't know if he-
but he's what, Monday night?
He's trying.
All right, we'll ask Barry.
Well,
Yeah, remember in here.
Jason, right?
Great.
Yeah, Jason.
Yeah.
Jason, but,
Barry, are you there?
He's not, he's trying to join.
Jason's been-
Sure.
Yeah, does this whatever policy would apply to everyone in the group, selectmen as well?
I mean, I think to be fair to everyone, it needs to be applicable to everyone. And I'm not running and gunning for it. I just,
I think the hard part's gonna be finding people to fill seats if somebody is absent for 3 times, and then we have
Yeah.
to start with somebody fresh who doesn't know the process, and then, I mean, just the more churn, the harder it is to ever.
yeah, the only benefit, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the only benefit is that if we don't have a full membership, our quorum number goes down. So we're kind of
So we're not
penalized.
Required to have a 7-person board.
Well, we are, but if we don't actually have that many members, I would assert that our quorum number's gone down by a fractional amount.
I mean, does it if you go from
Doesn't
7 to
select board have
6?
their executive session at 10 o'clock?
No, it's on 9 o'clock.
Is it
o'clock on
9?
Thursday.
Yeah, I think there's a regular conflict with
Um,
that. Barry's here.
Back on.
Hey, Barry, I don't know if you heard any of that discussion about day and time of meeting and location. Did you? Okay. So Barry, when you think you've got a solid connection, just please chime in and we'll get some feedback from you on that.
You also comment in the Zoom.
True.
Instead of videos.
Yeah. So on well, just to explore this topic just a little bit, while we're waiting to see if Harry can connect. If we did a Wednesday, I guess the question would be for me would immediately be not only time, but how will that affect our professional staff? You all have the Board of Selectmen on Wednesday. Is that preparatory time, or are you usually ready for the select board meeting the Friday before? Somewhat tongue in cheek.
No comment, no comment.
Well, you don't have to comment on the Friday before, but what about the Wednesday meeting day?
Wednesdays are, Tuesday and Wednesday are my two worst days.
Okay.
Completely, but I mean, Sue is here to really support you and is doing a great job, so. If there was a pressing need for me to be there to help or something, I could make my schedule work, but they are generally my two busiest days.
Okay.
But again, I'll do what I have to do to help the community, so.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I just wanted to get some clarification. And then with respect to the membership, is there any issues with, I don't love Thursday either. But is there any issue with perhaps a baby step if we move to 11 a.m. and relocated our venue? Is anyone
I can do that.
good with that?
I'm good with the relocated, located venue, the first Thursday of every month, I have a bank day at 10:30.
Okay,
I'm here for the first half hour and then out, so I might still come with that. And sometimes I can skip it, but it'll probably be 50-50.
and is there any adversity to 11:30? It's closer to lunch. I mean, I'd meet at 5 o'clock in the morning if you guys want to. That's not an issue for me. I'm not suggesting to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm out on that one.
11:30. I would prefer 11. I don't want to get too close, then you get through lunch and then you're going right back to work. I don't know.
You don't have.
I'd rather have time to go into lunch than taking over all of the lunch power.
Gotcha.
So I would prefer 11. I mean, I don't mind 10, I'd prefer 11,
Okay.
but, so I'd be more in favor of that.
All right, I do want to give some deference to Peter's not being able to be involved
I
in.
mean,
I mean, if we had a 3-meeting rule, he'd be out after 3.
Well, so would I.
well, I'd be
So,
there for half the time.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting one over the other. I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
maybe we'll just end up keeping it at 10. Okay. Barry?
He's
Oh,
gone.
it's gone again. All right, well, if we keep it at 10, then we don't have to, we're just looking at changing location. We can have a discussion about attendance if and as needed soon.
Yeah, I mean, I was away for a few weeks. My intention was to try to tune in, but I was also on a motorcycle, so I can't do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I have read the minutes, so tried to tune in, but yeah, I see what you mean. I know it's valuable to be here and I normally like to, but.
yeah, and I mean, just to be clear, it's not
Yeah.
directed at anyone. in
No,
particular.
I'm,
It's just an institutional thing. I'm trying to look forward to.
yeah,
When we sit down to do Rory's, having those brought up because you actually were involved with the department head as a member. Also being able to, contribute when we do our review for the ups and downs. A recommendation on the request, so just institutional stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's enough there. Report writing work group, Brian, can you just, I understand you're gonna give us more of a update, I guess, at the next meeting. With respect to Plum, or are you gonna
Well,
give
I'll
me
it
that,
now.
or
No, I can give it
you
to
do that now?
That's fine, because we had the conversation with them last week.
Yeah.
We sent the report. We discussed all of the things and the needs that we had discussed with you, Sue, and Rick, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Plum has indicated that they're not extremely heavy lifts and that they can get them done. We sent the Word document of the report so he could see the format and the layout so that he could work on making sure that the report he generates will then be able to be pulled into the format necessary for us. He's starting work on it. He is going on a long planned vacation for a little bit, so he said that he would have it to us by the end of the month at the latest, possibly a little earlier for us to review, to make recommendations on changes, and if it works, then he can finalize it. But he does understand that it's an extremely high priority for us to be able to move forward with that. So he said nothing that we asked for. He said he didn't say anything was impossible. He said this is actually very doable. So. Okay.
And additional question on that topic before we open up is were you all, I don't know if you recall, but we were looking at a footnotes for the Appendix A and a footnotes field for Appendix B. Is that something you were able to address? And if not, can we just make sure that that gets put in there? And sooner rather than later, because we'll need it as we're having discussion.
I think we have to send a follow-up with that. We did mention the footnotes to him. Didn't indicate it was not possible, but we'll follow up and make sure that it's included in
Okay.
all of everything else that he's working on being able to do for us with respect to the report.
Okay, and part and parcel of that is that somehow the individual who is responsible for content, who this budget season happens to be Richard, would have access to that.
Yes,
So-
we'll create a login to the.
Okay.
Much like you had before, or still do, so that he could have access to those things.
Okay, and we should maybe review that, Sue, if you have an opportunity, because my login, interestingly enough, allows me to create a capital request, but I can't actually work with the ones that exist.
Okay.
So it may be browser related, but we could figure that out. Okay, that's very helpful. I think on the template report, templating the report, thank you very much. At the end of the season, I'd like to say, I wish I did this sooner. But we'll see what happens. And I would also ask that the work group in any, correspondence that has to do with, meaningful correspondence would be CC'd so that they can start to become involved in what's going on and understand for their respective duty, what's happening.
Okay.
We're gonna meet, as I mentioned earlier, as a work group shortly and just kind of put a little bit better focus on things. So we can skip 10C, green sheet, committee reports, nothing, go to the order, presume everything is going well unless I hear otherwise.
I will say kudos for this. That was a great update.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Everything. I don't know if we've ever gotten something like that.
Yeah.
Very clear.
The middle of it.
Yeah,
Just gotta watch the select board meetings.
Well, I mean, you did that in 15 minutes.
Exactly. It's a little easier
Took me,
than that.
15 hours.
took me 30 last night to do, so.
Rehearsal. You had a rehearsal.
time.
Right.
Data next meeting is Thursday, October 13th at 10 a.m. Can we, on short notice, I understand, but better sooner rather than later, look through Sue to Erica. And I don't know if Erica schedules use of the facility or if that happens through their admin position.
Okay.
I don't
We're
recall.
looking for another location for meetings that we would like.
I'd like to just go back to Fort Fairgrounds. It's open and parking's available and it's convenient, still central to the island. Want to comment if they're have us? I always thought that was a great venue.
Yeah, also.
Is that meeting upstairs? In the smaller room or?
No,
Have to be
downstairs.
Downstairs in the community. room.
Yeah, and the reason I'm thinking of it, just to follow on, is all the hardware is set up. And so it's just a simple turn on the computer and you're ready to go. So that's, if it's not available for some reason, I tried to look at the calendar to make sure we weren't making unreasonable requests. So with that, we won't adjourn, but we're gonna do the work group session, which is Richard, Christie, Jill, and myself. Y'all are welcome to stick around, and then we'll adjourn since we have a quorum from there. Do I need to do something to shut this off at that point?
Well, no, if you're not adjourning the meeting, you better keep
This
it
one here?
running.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean.
Yes.
At that point, just sign out.
You can end the
I can
meeting
do- I don't know where else to go,
at that
right?
point. And that will stop the recording. And then you can just hit Alt Control Delete and that'll put it into one.
Okay,
And then
sounds good.
you're gonna have to lock the building though. Unless you want us to stay.
Yeah, those-
No, why don't you jot down the little password somewhere and I'll eat it when I'm done. And I'm dying to come in here late at night and wonder about having HCC meetings there.
Let me just have this. Here's the code to the box, so,
Perfect.
and then, and all you have to do to shut this off, you can end the meeting when you officially adjourn, and then that'll shut the recording off, and then, just hit Alt Control Delete, and that'll lock, and you hit lock, and it'll lock the computer.
Okay, and actually, I'm gonna get on that one because then I can bring up the capital
Or
report.
you can hit share screen and do all.
Yeah, that'll make it a lot easier to
Yep.
do this next part of the meeting. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Sue, it's nice to meet you in person.
Nice to
Thank
meet
you
all
for
of you.
coming over here. on
Yeah,
the rainy
thank
If you
day.
have any issues, Mr. Chair, you can either text or call me and I can run out.
Or we'll simply adjourn.
Well, I prefer to know so that I can make sure to come back and the building's locked, but. if
Oh,
that's
no,
the
no,
case,
well, I can.
That's the
lock it
code
away.
for the box. The
Okay.
key is right here on the corner
Gotcha.
of the table. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
You're very
Hey,
welcome.
congratulations to you and your team.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful words.
They do all the heavy lifting and the hard work, so I appreciate all of them and the work that they put in.
You're a magnanimous personality. Okay, give me a moment. Pull this up.
Everybody, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Peter.
Thanks, Pete.
See you on Thursday.
Slide 23. Do that one. Okay. So we have the report up. Content presentation schedule. Do you guys, I mean, have you guys had a chance to kind of really look through this, or it's just been too busy, which I completely understand? I'm just trying to get an idea of how to start and facilitate this.
I've perused it pretty quickly, but not an in-depth with, I haven't really gone through it with, me being assigned to it in mind,
Okay.
thoroughly, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of back into it then, because I think it's important for the scheduling purposes. Jill, I believe that what will happen, I think we should stick with ideals and then we can try and adjust, pragmatically from there.
Okay.
Typically what would happen is I would compile this body of work. Much of it, except for the narrative, the recommendations and our typical practices. After funding sources were identified by town admin and finance, which is typically just after the first week of January. So sometime in early mid-January.
Okay.
And the reason is because the presentation of the report breaks down into various categories, which are in large part determined by the funding sources. I have a feeling that with that background out there, that the way that this is going to work is that the timeline will be similar as a matter of necessity, because that's when the funding sources are determined by, they can be determined because the cherry sheet comes in, free cash and all that stuff
Right.
from the state. And then while preliminary funding sources will have long since been identified by town manager and finance department. And when I say identified, I mean to us, to the select board and to FinCom and broadcast. None of that can be fine tuned and actually put into a report until it's solidified. So I don't think that solidification is going to happen much differently in terms of schedule.
So how late do you think they're gonna be finished with that?
I think it'll probably be that January, the early in the second week of January, or late in the first week or early in the second week of January. However,
They'll supply the funding sources. is that-
yeah, well, so
Or
this
be
is,
finished with,
so this is what's gonna happen though, is
I mean, it
if
sounds like he's pretty on top of some stuff already, if he knows what debt exclusions he has, so that's kind of good.
it's not, it doesn't make a difference.
I know it'll change, but
Well, it's not so much how that if it changes a large amount or a small amount, it's just that if it changes at all, it changes the appendix, it changed information in each appendix and within the summary report of the
right,
body of the report. But this is the good news. What I reviewed with Brian, Rick and Sue, and they apparently conveyed to Plum, is that all that information will be presented in the body of the report. We won't be doing any of that work ourselves anymore. It's going to be automated.
Yeah.
So while the schedule of their deliverable may not change, the scope of work for us to accomplish after that date is going to change dramatically.
right.
So I wanted to give you that because I think it's important for all of you to have schedule in mind.
But a lot of
Go ahead.
Rory's are gonna be done by then. I mean, I think I got mine done then.
Yeah, Rory's to be done. The thing is the Rory's don't show up in the report.
No, but it reflects the broader viewpoint, I think, of why something got approved or not. I mean, there's kind of a theme.
Yeah.
So
And
I
that-
feel like that's important for Richard.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to be like, okay, we're supportive of this or not. I mean, maybe you don't care, but
Yep.
to me, that.
Well, that.
And as
it's not
Rory's
that I don't
done,
care,
to
I
me, it's
just,
really important for Richard.
just that I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, well, I just realized now when we're talking, I was like, you know what, getting those done for him is really key for him.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's,
so
and
I
that's,
get it.
And as the guy responsible for the presentation, I'm not gonna let him off the hook. He's gonna have to do some
oh, you guys didn't know that the three of you are presenting.
work.
No
I'm
way,
just a
I'm not,
back-
hey,
I'm just a backstop.
I'm here for moral
No,
support.
I'm talking about some of this. Some. of the
Yeah, no, we'll get,
Procedures.
yeah, totally. Well, that I'm not just gonna like, push you off in a boat without the sails rigged or anything like that. So that's just, I think that's look, what I'm trying to do is outline the framework. And that's the most important part of the framework in some regards is schedule. And so once you have an understanding of where we are now, when we're gonna be where we have to go.
Yeah.
And that it really hasn't changed, but the underlying, given the report will be in large part delivered, the numerical values will be in large part delivered by finance through the software. That also gives you an idea of what kind of work will be involved. A very brief view into what kind of work will be involved. Now we're going to move to content, which I think is the next part of the structural aspect of this sequentially. Although, as Jill said, Rory's happened sooner. So I just want to talk about schedule first because I thought.
Well, I don't know if they did. I know I did all mine up by the deadline. I did, but like, I hit the deadline last year is what I remember. And
Yeah.
maybe that deadline ought to move up, or you give everybody a little leeway. Like, obviously the airport will be something that, that they'll probably have to meet again and,
Mhm.
you know,
Talking Rory's.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
There's
here's
always-
what I would love to know. What Rory's can we be confident to do now? And then what, like you were saying, we were gonna do them in the meetings, and I like that idea. I think that's really smart. Cause then some of them are done, but then sometimes we have a meeting, it's like, I can't do that, Rory. I need to
Right.
dig into that a little more.
So I want to back up just a second. I think we can, we should, personally, I try to do them as soon as I can afterward because it makes a difference in my being able to process. It's just easier.
Yeah.
I remember what they said, I remember
Totally.
comments.
I think it's smart.
The fact that we have the database made, we built it into the database so you could actually sit at home after dinner, the house quiets down maybe for a half an hour. Most of the number of requests we have this year, you probably could go through in 10 minutes and review them if you did it while it was fresh in your mind. So I would encourage everyone to do them quickly with respect, or
Yeah.
quickly after a meeting where the department head was. I think the bigger thing for understanding is the Rory's, they help determine the content of the report, but they're not directly reflected in the report.
Mhm.
So what will happen with the Rory's, what I mean by that is we'll all do our report.
They're interpreted.
Yeah, and then we'll sit down, we'll have a meeting, we'll discuss it, we'll, as a result of that discussion, we'll have some preliminary ups and downs. That helps informs the select board and the finance committee, obviously town manager and finance department. Later on, it also helps inform us as to, what will be recommended and what won't. To that extent, it's reflected in the report, but otherwise the Rory, unless there are comments in the comment section or in the footnote section, the Rory's don't themselves show up in the report.
No, I know.
So, I mean, just to be clear about it.
Yeah, no, I get that. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
but but whether or not we vote to approve something or not is in the report. I mean, as a group, our recommendations are in there. So
Sure.
it seems like those derive from the Rory's, I guess.
Are you talking about getting a jump on it?
Yes, because listen, I can look at this and I know what's gonna happen. Like, this isn't, I don't know how we're all gonna vote on what we're gonna recommend. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I know what the town wants. And so if he has to write something, I'm just trying to help you, Richard.
Yeah.
If he has to write something that's very reflective of what the town wants, headline, the airport wants most of the money from the enterprise funds. I mean, some of that could be written is what I'm saying. Like,
Well, actually, no, because it's not required to be. Okay, let me back into this. The format dictates what's written, and the format is, by design, numerically driven. It's by categories and costs. So and again, we can't put that into the report until we ultimately finally determine the funding source. Richard won't have to do any of that writing. So I think as
Okay.
opposed to rehashing that, let's
I
jump
thought he
into
was gonna
the.
have
Are we
to like,
talking this?
Yeah, let's jump right into content, because I think it's gonna
Okay.
answer a bunch of questions.
I thought he was gonna have
So,
to
yeah.
rewrite like.
I
the whole
thought I
thing.
was gonna have to do
No,
all
no,
of
no,
this,
no,
no?
No, that's going in the
No.
format. That I get, but we don't
Yeah.
know.
So let's just quickly go through this. We got the timeline. Let's just try and alleviate some apprehension. The table of contents, mild changes. The biggest issue here is wrestling with Microsoft Word. Seriously. I mean, the introduction is the introduction. You all can change it as you see fit. I've tried to put the most pertinent information in and be succinct. Welcome to revise.
I'm saying it's a straight carryover.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that.
Update on the committee.
Totally agree.
Excellent. Summary of capital allocations by account. This, with respect to data, is my understanding that this will be filled completely in a Word format. And then presentation will come into play, which we'll discuss next.
Yep.
You guys can just, I think I would suggest that for now, since this is happening on a tight timeline with respect to the date of delivery of the report. And it's a new project for Plum, the software developer, that we would stick to what's presented on the page as it's presented. Because that limits their load, and it will mean that their deliverable, which is a report template, can actually be delivered without potential issues. Make sense? Any issues with the format?
No.
Okay. The only thing we're gonna need to do on this page actually is, other than presentation, well, it could be considered presentation, is update the date and the page number if
I still
necessary.
wish that could be combined, but
Yeah.
like,
And again, this is all driven by finalization of the funding sources.
Yeah.
And obviously, our Rory's in determining what we make a recommendation to fund, which we will have done on our schedule in mid-December. For the most part, subject to, errant requests coming in that happen. What was said for the previous page can be said for this page, with the exception of the footnotes. So this is where footnotes, these footnotes are typically from Appendix A. So, well, the footnote for general fund is typically from Appendix A, and the enterprise accounts is static. There's a page number that needs to be updated, so very little changes here, and again, other than the date and the page number perhaps. FY requests greater than equal to $1 million for both general fund and enterprise accounts. Rinse and repeat the prior page, but no footnotes. Projected cost of borrowing impacts. This is my understanding. All this information will be provided to us. It needs to be tweaked for presentation purposes, and we'll get into presentation momentarily. The enterprise ratepayer impacts narrative is static, other than the link if rates have been updated by either water and sewer, or to the extent the airport has updated rates. So
like, that's a good question. Like, why do you have that there?
well, because one of our roles is to forecast the impact of any capital improvement cost to both the taxpayer and the ratepayer. We don't have the detailed information that we have for projected cost of borrowing impacts for the enterprise accounts. Those are simply what their rates are. So our due diligence is simply to outline how those rates are determined and a link to them. With respect to the projected cost of borrowing impacts, that's actually a mandate of the town to publish this information in some form or another a certain amount of days prior to
Mhm.
annual town meeting.
Transparency too.
Yeah, and it's also, just due diligence and transparency.
So I see all of this as a carryover with edits to make sure that it's
Yeah.
up to date.
Yeah. Yeah. You thought I gave you the hard job. They're all equally important, don't get me wrong. Debt service is the same type of thing as the conversation we just had about enterprise ratepayer and projected cost to the taxpayer. We're provided the amortization tables for the debt service and provide a link to those. It turns out that, that is the last thing on my list of importance, so it doesn't always make it into the report. I don't know if there was something that indicated how many people actually clicked on it, even if they were there. I don't know anyone ever would. But it is something we should put in there, and going forward, we'll be able to, because we've got a few people involved. Statement of procedures, typically static. The widest variation here has been whether or not we do liaisons. This is informational purposes for people who have no idea what the capital program committee does or what their process is. It also is, the idea was that we're memorializing it, and at a later date in our maturation, we could determine whether we want to make modifications, what works, what doesn't, what could work better, so on and so forth. That holds true for each of the subcategories: annual timeline and related, other communication and planning. So Richard, you and I would, have a cup of coffee for 10 minutes would be the extent of what would be required. And we would probably just go through this with a red line, and for this season, I anticipate there would probably be, it would be, for instance, page 9 of 13, strategic integrated planning sessions. Basically, we're meeting with the select board and the finance committee chairs, town admin, finance department, and looking at requests not only for the coming year, which we've already done as chairs, but in a broader scope under the 10-year plan. We haven't done that this year. We may say that although this is one of the best practices we've implemented, it was not, for various reasons, implemented this year. I don't know. We'll see where we are later in the process, but that's just an example. Procedural recommendations, I'll tackle this primarily, and then bring some of these to the group. Stephen, yes.
What'd you put an S there?
I have Stephen already in there.
I mean, just so you're aware, I think you understand my perspective on these. Some of these have been on the books here for quite a while. I think that if not this year, this budget season, after the budget season, after our report, we should dive into these at a single meeting and determine which of these we want to promote, which of these we do not believe should be a priority any longer. Just for the sake of, for planning purposes, more of a look back. The extent of my modifications to these were very minimal and a high priority stamp for this report versus the prior 2 years. They were modified the prior report as some of these things were implemented. So I want to be fair too. I don't want to be misperceived as being unfair. Some aspects of each of these have been implemented. It's just a question of how do we want to track going forward these recommendations. Let's see. Procedural recommendations, exactly the same nature as the prior comments I just made. And an example of things of recommendation that is being implemented is Rick did develop a more robust 10-year SIP. So it wasn't just a spreadsheet. There was some, my understanding is there's some rationale put to the process.
Right.
So it can be communicated to people. It's valid for us to look at that and trying to determine how much further we want to take it. So on and so forth.
Well, it's kind of helpful because all of a sudden things do change and people push things off.
Yeah.
I feel like we see that constantly.
Yeah, and so I tend to keep them in the report
Yeah.
and then update them as we go. And then I try to make a note if something has been implemented when it was implemented or how successful it was, or, along those lines. It's more of I think, a historical reference at this point. So with respect to content, again, Appendix A, Richard, my understanding, and when I say my understanding is I'm advocating for these to be the modifications, and I understand that they will be. And when I say the modifications, I mean that these will be delivered in basically the format they are and edited for presentation. So, and then we're gonna kind of segue, Christie, good timing.
Yeah, sorry, my son's going off island. Someone's coming to pick up a bag in my truck.
Yeah, no,
If I have to run, I'll give it to him, but.
not a problem at all,
Go
but
ahead.
this is we're gonna kind of back into
Actually,
pres.
I have a
Yeah.
question about this, just like, because again, I'm still so new. I learn so much every week. It's kind of overwhelming. The request and the recommendation, do we ever recommend a different number than what they request? Like,
Sure.
I feel like it's either 0 or it's what they request.
Oh, a different number? Sometimes. One doesn't pop to my mind, but we can look through it.
I think we have. I think if there's been components of a request,
I feel like requests have changed and then they come back, but like by the time it gets to the report, you're not gonna see what the original request was.
Yeah, so actually that is where we cover that in a footnote.
Footnote, right?
So this, yeah, I
That's you,
think what you're
Christie.
describing, Jill, is the iterative.
That's you. Aren't you doing footnotes?
no, Richard's a footnote.
Oh, you're doing the
Footnotes.
footnotes too?
So I don't know if this particular year, but. Yeah, here, number 7, initial request 500,000, later revised to 1 million. That was
Yeah.
on the town
Yeah.
side.
Yeah,
We do, I think what tends to happen is we will make substantive comments during our process. And if a number is to be revised, town manager and finance, if their agreement, will revise it. And then it shows up in the report
yeah.
as the number, just because it cuts down on the, well,
Yeah.
for 2 reasons. One, the request isn't finalized until it's finalized. And what I mean by that is town manager has the ability and oversight and ability to change the amount or the nature of a request right up till we're done reviewing. So if it's determined that it's going to be changed by an amount, it's simpler than having to create footnotes just to have them change it if they're amenable.
Yeah.
Christie, where I was going with this is that my understanding, I'm not going to keep repeating that. I'm anticipating we're going to receive this information in this format, except for perhaps the font and the coloring and the cell, the border lines and things that have been developed for relatively easy reading of kind of complex or at least dense information. So what we'll get is an Excel spreadsheet that has these here. What you will get is a spreadsheet that indicates what the width of each of these columns are. What the font color is, what the font type is. So presentation is basically going to be to either, follow this for the sake of consistency or come up with changes that the group recommends and votes, the committee recommends and votes on. And it's basically going to be, kind of like a desktop publishing aspect of font color, border color. The goal here wasn't to give you guys a whole ton of work to do. It was to shift the responsibility to a fairly automated process that's overseen by a work group.
Yeah.
To distribute the load, and everybody picks up a little bit, and then you get the
Yeah.
experience and you pass it on. You
To
get
the
to
next
pick your
people. I agree with
replacement.
that totally.
Okay,
That way we're not flying blind when we
yeah,
look at
a
it.
little institutional integrity and history there.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm on FinCom, they do ask a lot of questions about our meetings and, so it's.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
I'm cool with that. So that will be this is all Appendix A.
but they often want to ask like, what was it last year? What are they gonna do it next year? And then I'm like, I don't have that in front
Well-
of me, but maybe I need to start taking it.
I think what I'm hopeful, and the concept, at least for me, the vision that I have is that the 10-year SIP will address those types of questions in advance, just by simply the way it's prepared. The information that's contained, just like with this. we tend to have, over the years I've been involved, I think Christie, you would probably say the same, is that the number of questions and the kind of density of questions and the directions of questions have subsided because the information is provided in advance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, still, we run into, you know, some department heads who don't offer that much.
Right.
Information.
But when FinCom gets in the select board,
Yes, yes. I
it's
think
a
so.
different world now.
Yeah, I think, well, I think there's a lot in this report
Yeah.
that, I think the report, was partially developed with that in mind, a lot of those.
I can say it certainly was.
Yeah.
It took us out of the prior and not
Yeah.
Yeah,
for any reason other than it was just, there wasn't information up front. And, you know, it was part of maturing the process and it was part of somebody having personal time at the right time for that to happen.
Mm.
Because if that personal time wasn't available in that little window that we had to transition this, it never would have happened. Which is to say, if I had been busy doing something else that I absolutely couldn't give up, I would have never done this.
so is the fire department, by the way, for today, are they gonna come back? Yeah.
Kind of flux that. So, Christie's out. Basically, we're gonna do the same with Appendix B. Footnotes, Richard, that's where you'll come in. What I would suggest is maybe just take a look at the footnotes, for the prior couple of years' reports there on the town website for ease of access, because I know you don't have these on your nightstand.
Well, I haven't printed out.
Okay,
Old school.
and you'll get the idea of what the, you know, basically what they're, the type of information we're trying to collect on a request by request basis. And it's not for every request.
I got another question.
Yeah, please.
This is big, because we do have a lot of. Since you put in the funding sources at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you ever feel that you should show, what the town's intake is, like their property taxes versus, you know, car taxes? I mean, is it just, I don't know that we have to do that. I was just curious.
I think it's something that could be developed. It's not necessary, that kind of falls over into the finance committee side of it.
It is,
But and with respect to reporting, but with respect to like how we determine. Like, it's legitimate for any member of the committee to say, hey, we're looking at this funding source and I'm really curious
and it
why
says
we
it's
are.
our property taxes and,
Yeah.
you know, how much should we bring in on our property taxes this
Yeah.
year? Or how much of that was commercial versus residential,
Yeah.
because that is in there. You know, there's some footnotes about the commercial tax.
Yeah.
And
And we
then,
actually do identify that. I'll get to that when we get to it,
okay,
but
sorry,
your question, no, it's not.
we don't have to do it, it's just an idea.
No,
mean,
I-
something that's on my mind this year for FinCom, just so you know.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone's ever seen our breakdown of property taxes on the Nantucket.
Right.
But I think we only pay property taxes on about 35% of properties on the Nantucket. People might be surprised to know that.
You mean residential versus residential, commercial versus open space?
Yes, and a lot of other properties too, that
Yeah.
don't pay tax, like town buildings and
Yeah,
schools
yeah.
and. A lot of houses that like nonprofits own and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of property that's not taxed.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of a good thing for people to know, and it's just something I was thinking about, and I was like, oh, maybe that's. And it doesn't mean that the income has gone down, right, for the town.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean that, but
so our window,
what
and sorry, Chris, the valid window on that would be. How does it relate to capital program requests?
well, it just struck me because it was talking about the commercial property tax, and I thought,
Yeah.
oh, maybe that's.
Yeah.
You know, how much is that? Because now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I've ever noticed that as a line item in the property tax.
Yeah, I was just gonna,
Separating that out between commercial property, because their rate is different than residential.
if it.
And then the carve out from the year rounders versus.
If there is a section in here that would be informative, I don't think you really should like pick out, like you can generalize, say town buildings, nonprofits, bang, bang.
Oh, yeah, we
Not
don't even have to
taxable.
go to that detail.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just was wondering, is there an assessor report already, maybe.
So when we get, this is the projected cost of borrowing impacts, and then that's where that perspective would be valid for capital program review.
Like, here's for example, just to get you how I'm thinking. And I'm not positive I know exactly where I want this to go, but when we talk about he mentioned all the affordable housing stuff, which was still confused about the Surfside WWTF. Did he mean AHTF or something?
Wastewater.
Wastewater treatment.
That's a wastewater, I thought, okay, but like the Nobody Farm Road Housing Development Phase 2, like where that money's coming from. I hear the town manager say that that's, some of that money's gonna come from short-term rental tax and things like that, so. And I guess we'll have that in the funding source, so maybe it'll be
Yeah,
okay,
that'll-
it will be addressed at that
Absolutely no
point.
question. That is more than an appropriate time to, well, first of all, when the request comes in for discussion, we
Yeah.
can ask and seek information on that. And before we resolve a recommendation, and it will definitely be reflected in some shape or form in the funding source recommendation.
Yeah,
To the level we want to pull it out as a footnote, we can also do that.
okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So what's the extent that you would reach out to, as you were putting together this report? Reach out to a department head for clarification on something?
Typically what I do is I will direct that through staff, so through Sue.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, process wise, we should do that, but it also, it just keeps the loop consistent, so they have so that a department head provides information, and it's not that it's not consistent, it's that it's also on the relevant staff person's plate, it's somewhere in their mind.
Yeah.
So that if a question comes up, they're not kind of like, I don't know anything about that, it's just a courtesy in a way, but it's also process related.
would you say unrelated?
But it happens rarely.
Yeah.
Because
okay.
what, the other part of it, and this is along that line. So I would typically have several meetings with Brian, not an insignificant number of hours, reviewing funding sources preliminarily, and I will do that. Footnotes will probably be derived to some extent from that process. It may be beneficial. We'll see how many footnotes, because we have fewer requests, a significant number this year.
Yeah.
Whether bringing the content person into those meetings makes sense. If it's gonna, so far it's been, I think, 3 footnotes.
I know one, the pond dredging.
Yeah.
The other two.
I've got 2 jotted down in my notes. So
Anyone help there?
I'm trying to,
What's the
Offload
footnote
some
on the
of
pond
this.
dredging?
Funding sources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's
There's
that coming from?
there's a local group that's gonna
Do
kick in
some of
a
it.
$1,000,000.
right.
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
typically.
here, so you've got the text right there.
Yeah, so what I was gonna say about this particular presentation is the background spreadsheet actually includes the gross value of each of these categories of real estate.
Yeah.
So it is available to us if, as a curiosity, it's not something we would comment on, but it's not like we're partitioned off, it's not available for us to review.
Right.
And then this obviously gives the total cost on the mill rate for the respective projects and the projects as a whole.
Yeah, they always want to make it look like it costs you $3.
Who's they?
We know who they is.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, Jill, I mean, it might be interest of you to the others, is that there is a portion of the spreadsheet that reflects what the homeowner exemption is, the dollar values based on the average and
Yeah,
the median.
It's in
and
there.
It's all like,
It's in there. I mean, yeah,
it's all
Peppered in.
included, but. Okay, so Christie, the recap was that we were at everything that was said about Appendix A with respect to what your responsibility should be if Plum comes through is the same for Appendix B and C. It's gonna boil down to literally formatting the presentation of an Excel spreadsheet. What I was doing is actually this information here is a separate column of data. So I was adding a row for each record, dragging the information underneath it, reformatting it all so that there were indents and justifications and so on and so forth, creating these
Do you
headings.
believe that's all coming through in a
Yes,
finished form.
yes, yeah. So dramatically different process. So, and I'm not telling you what, I'm just telling you, those are things you don't have to do.
Okay. Were these your narratives?
No, so these are,
It's each specific request.
yeah, these are from
No, I
the,
know they are, but
no, I didn't, and I make a footnote.
In the capital request.
I just didn't know if those are kind of your specific narratives on, I understand the requests, but.
I used to have a footnote here that indicated that the descriptions are as provided by the department head.
Yeah.
And we can add that so that it's clear to people.
I mean, with some of these, those descriptions are in Rory, information.
Yeah.
In each request.
And they'll be auto-filled to a field underneath. It's just gonna be a dramatically different animal putting this together. What we will need to be doing, Richard, was, and you guys can suss it out, is, you might put you might get the original report of this. Let me go down to the footnotes. Okay, so here's enough real estate to make the points. You might receive this spreadsheet without being blitzed up and pretty. You'd put the footnotes in, and you might in this field indicate the source of funding by an abbreviation. So RNA for number 4. Christie gets that report after you've made your footnotes, and then he would add the superscript. I mean, this is micro granular, but I mean, that's why we're here. Because the plum is not gonna provide the footnote notations. So Christie would receive it, and he'd have a key here as to which of these categories, for instance, raise and appropriate for number 4, RNA, and Christie would put, a little superscript here, and then you get rid of it down here, the little key. And then once that was completed for each of the appendices, he would, for the appendix as a whole, you would go ahead and do your columns and your fonts and your color and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's how I would suggest doing it, because then you're not having to backtrack. So really, it shouldn't be overly involved. I mean, it's gonna seem like kind of a PIA, but again, same type of thing, Richard would go in and he would put the footnotes in the Excel. And then it might make sense, Richard, for you just to do it, because then you put it up here, you're eliminating, here's a footnote number 2. And this is AIP, so I basically what I've done is I put that in italics as well as the superscript. And the AIPs are all in italics to indicate like.
What that means?
Yeah, because with construction drawings, usually it's like tip means same thing for every instance of something. So AIP then is breaks down the funding, 90% from FAA, Massport is 5%. You guys can change the language as you see fit. But that's the scope of it, and that's how I generally see you each interacting. It gives you a better idea, right, on kind of what your responsibility is.
Yeah, I mean, what was biggest hurdle for you? Was it getting the Rorys in?
2-part. Rory's for me as a programmatic matter, so we can deliver to town manager and up-down, preliminary up-down, in order for select board and FinCom to have had that broadcasted to them, which I think is an important element of the process. So Rory's are important. Rory's, we always had, with respect to the report, Rory's, we always had enough time that people did their Rory's before, timely.
A lot of meetings, we didn't do them.
Yeah, that it didn't really affect the report.
Okay.
So the next biggest thing was pinning down funding sources, because without the funding sources, literally this information can't be input. And when I was doing it, the sheets you see in the report, that's all manual calculation. I mean, it's within spreadsheets, but those subset tables were all created manually because they're different every year. So a lot of the lifting I did, you're not gonna have, just saying, you're not gonna have to do it.
I have a really broad question.
Yeah, and then I want to just get back to the last few so you understand what it
The
is.
appendix,
Broad question.
broad question. Why, I'm surprised that they can't tell us pretty much where they want it to come from. I feel like when we ask Brian, he does say he kind of knows where it's gonna come.
Well, they do know, but they won't know. So like, even if, let me just try and jump ahead of you on this. If the numbers change $1,000 over 10 requests, which they don't, it's usually $100,000 over 10 or 15 requests when we have almost 100 requests. All of the information in the report changes because it's based upon source of funding, typically,
Mhm.
and, or at least the source of funding, which is appendix, Appendix A changes because you have to resort all of the requests. Or you have to rename where the funding source is. Appendix, when you do this manually, Appendix B is created from Appendix A. If I were to, as a virgin process, wait till we had funding sources, like I could do Appendix A, and then I could just change in the field, the account funding source, the funding source. There's two ways to then get Appendix B. You replicate Appendix A and then you reformat it,
Right?
or you create it from a virgin process. Either way, it requires accurate funding sources.
Yeah.
So there was no way to actually, and then from Appendix B, you get the information for Appendix C, or at least for each of the tables within the body of the report.
Mhm.
So that it's not so much that they don't know to a good extent where the funding source, what the funding sources are. They don't know to an accurate or precise extent, or at least not enough that we can finish the report. Now, by templating it, that's all gonna go away. Because literally, they should be able to push a button and spit out the product in a raw form that we can then finalize. Does that answer your question?
Well, I just like
We
they,
keep going back to that, but I want to make sure
to me, the funding source is important even when I do my Rory and I don't get to know it. So it's kind of.
well, then we should bring that up as a topic. Well, actually, no.
I
wanna-
understand on the debt exclusion, that's like kind of a political decision of what
Right.
they're gonna bring to the town. I get
Yeah.
that. I'm okay with not totally knowing every single thing that on the debt exclusion until, the cycle gets going.
Yeah.
I get that, but some of this other stuff, come on, I think we should know where the breathing apparatus for the fire department's coming, like.
Right, well, so I'm not defending it either way, but just informationally, sometimes that will, I'm not. Sure.
There's
this
some
is-
layups in there is what I'm saying.
It's
Use
like
the basketball
sometimes something will come from
terminology.
the ambulance reserve fund, because while they were thinking they would fund these smaller items from free cash, they, for general fund items, not enterprise, they being, town manager and finance, make a determination later that they've got to change something else, but we could use some of the money, I'm using an example, may not be accurate, from the ambulance reserve fund. So
Yeah.
even the small things can change.
I know.
But on the
You're
funding
right.
sources, I think the more important point is that, and we are capable, and we have been doing that, is at least the last couple of years, is that Brian presents funding sources to us during the process of reviewing or finalizing
Oh.
the RORIs.
Yeah.
So when we do our up down, we have an idea of what the funding source is. And in fact, the report we send to, which I'm still responsible for, as chair, the report we send to town manager, select board and finance committee includes the funding sources.
Mhm.
So we will have that information, and you should feel free, either want to do homework before the meeting or at the meeting to ask about it. Without question.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
here, just on the appendix A, I just. This has been asked a couple different times by a couple different people. So what happens is, this is all from the source data, and then it's formatted. Before it's formatted, the funding source is added. And the RORIs and any differentiation and what was the request was in the amount. Over here is typically, there's a column for funding sources. It's not put into play on this particular report. Or on the appendix. On the next appendix, it comes into play because the prior appendix is reformatted. And then this is created, including the headers. Again, we won't be doing that again, but that's part of the reason why funding sources were so important.
Yeah.
There is C, this is just something that accounting will provide. It's, this is basically what I was looking for a capital status projects update. appropriations expenditures to date on FY 23 capital requests. I was looking for it for prior years. It's being developed, Brian, and so we're working on it. Separate topic, but just to mention it. So this one will also be provided. It will be as opposed to being provided from Plum. It will be provided from finance. Same process for us. If there's a footnote, we'll identify that in preliminary meeting, prior to report writing, and otherwise it's simply going to be adjust the formatting and font colors and tax rate history comes from finance, rinse and repeat the prior sheet.
Yeah.
We're gonna, you guys will have to make an executive decision. I guess we'll just knock 1981 off because we're not gonna have space. Appendix E, I'll just
You
give you
should show
guys.
1981 though. That's exactly what people ought to see.
Well, I
at-
mean, we
Get rid
can
of seven.
decrease the font. You guys can figure it out. We're just
Get rid of
running out
seven.
of real estate.
Century.
You're seeing any fine.
I know, but look how it
People
goes
appreciate
down.
when they can read a document and not have to like struggle through it.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, for me, the benefit is like with
You could just do a chart.
digital. If you do digital, you
Just
can,
do a chart. Mhm.
yeah, you could do a line. chart. You guys, if you want to introduce something, feel free.
It's such a general thing. Like, I don't think people pay that much attention to it. It might make it easier for the plum guy to be like, okay.
Yeah, well, Plum, so this will come from finance. So really all they do is after we do the
So they could convert that to a graph.
capital exclusions and we determine what will come out of the general, what will come out of the tax base and how it will come out. This is derived.
Steve, what was that new column in 2002? What was that?
Oh, so this is CPA contribution.
Got it.
So this would be a good one to have a footnote. I sacrificed the footnote somewhere
Yeah.
along the line.
Yeah.
Appendix E, I'll just give you guys a copy of this in PDF format. So this is the capital project request form. I would like us to get to maturing our process so that we're passing on information to capital program that's more meaningful in this particular area, costs and funding. Especially when it comes down to that effect on operating budget and a maintenance plan. None of these things have really been developed. So those are things that I'm hoping to be able to free my time up a little bit by not doing the report. And the committee will have time and we can be getting into these. Because I think it'd be informative. It's some information I presume the department has a handle on. And it would be informative to FinCom and Select Board. The other thing just to be aware is, the database, the way was envisioned was that personnel charts would be resident in the database and could be mapped and updated easily. So really for the department head, it is a matter of pointing and clicking based upon the number of persons in the class. We're not at the idea is not, and I wouldn't support asking department heads to have to go and figure all this out.
No,
But by pointing and clicking and adding 2 of SC class would autofill this information or 1.5 or something like that. This is stuff you already see. This is static. So I just provide it
Mhm.
and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think what I would just ask is think about it. We've obviously got a little bit of time, but think about things that might come into play now that you have a better background
Mhm.
on the report within your own area of responsibility. Or if you have ideas to support your coworker, work group members, please, we are subject, I'll caution you a couple of procedural things. We are subject to open meeting law. So if you guys want to have discussion, it should be scheduled as a work group meeting, perhaps after a meeting. Don't get caught up in emailing. It becomes a chain email. If anyone ever did a FOIA request,
Right.
you'll be subject to like 100 hours of
Oh,
open
yeah.
meeting law study.
You just have to respond to those. It's
Yeah.
horrible.
Oh, you know what? I don't think I did I am screen sharing. Okay, good. All right, so thoughts, questions now, or,
So should we meet again next week or we don't need to meet for a little bit?
Probably not next week, but at some point, maybe a little sort of a
How-
follow-up as we absorb our responsibility, I would say. And I will thoroughly review the document just to see if there's any more questions I might have or any additions,
It's very detailed and thorough. I don't want you to think, I don't think that it is.
No, I mean,
Oh, it's super detailed,
yeah.
you know?
It's just a lot of, it's not so easy. And I know we really write it, I think. We know who's reading it, who understands how things work, but it'd be nice if it got to the point where anybody could read
Well,
it.
the 6 people say that would read this document appreciate all the detail.
Yeah.
The 560.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe not, don't
Yeah.
get there.
Well, so the companion report, I mean, just so you're aware, what's
Yeah.
developed over the years is a kind of a companion effort and a companion report, which is preliminary in nature, which is what Brian reviewed today. So
Yeah,
then that goes to
thing's
select
great.
board and FinCom, and it can be easily digested and talked about
How
by the
often they do that?
newspaper
Once
once a month during the
Yeah.
budget season.
Yeah, so that's available once a month.
So they
Oh,
cover
no, I know,
the,
I watched this.
What is it,
meeting,
Sinead?
but
What is-
it's,
so the report that Brian reviewed with us
Yeah.
is, as it matures, typically, I believe in October, they start, and then November, December, they present to select board,
You know,
FinCom.
yeah, it's
So
one
it's
of the
a-
things that's helping them get feedback about what they're gonna put on as a debt exclusion or not as well. I mean, it's good that they do.
Yeah, and then so they get the broad picture from that, and then we get the joy of putting together the details. And then they get the benefit of
Yeah.
having the details, sitting at home having a cup of coffee versus having to make a list to query capital program committee about.
have you ever pondered an addendum for some reason for any data on this? Oh, it's on here. Instead, so you have a report that's
Written,
maybe a little less, but maybe if there is those 6 people that want to pull up the addendum, they can. But that the report itself is a little bit more manageable for the average citizen.
So I actually took a reverse process
Just a
into
thought.
that. No, I get it.
Yeah.
And I'll explain it. and You tell me if you think.
Yeah.
So what I did was, as opposed to doing an executive summary and naming it and such, I presented the summary information up front. So those first 3 or 4 numerical, the excerpts of the worksheets are, if you look through that, it's going to answer all the broad stroke questions, other than on a request by request level with some idea of descriptions. And then the next step, I think there's an intermediate step, which is an addendum could be the report, basically what Brian and Sue, what Rick was till now, but Brian and Sue are presenting.
mhm.
So that's the kind of the intermediate. It goes from that 1,000 foot, which is already in the report in the narrative body, to the 500 foot, which is what Brian, a version of what Sue and Brian have presented.
Yeah.
To 10 feet above, which is what our appendix A, B, and C are. And the rest of the.
In the links, there is the links. They do have the links.
Yeah.
You know,
So I mean, it could be something we develop is that intermediate step, if somebody didn't want to dig down into the detail. I haven't thought through how I'd want to present that. I would, if we did something like that, I would suggest that we would,
I'm with you. I don't wanna write a report for 5 people,
key off.
you know?
you would who?
I'm with Steven. I think I'm hearing him say like, it's hard to write a report just for the 5 people that might, like,
Like, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying,
Yeah.
I mean, this report is for the.
It's worth it. He
It's
said
for,
it's worth it.
actually, this report's for everyone.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, the detail that is in this is significant and great,
Right.
you know?
So-
But I just didn't know if there was ever, it came up when you were organizing this, if there was a thought to. make an
Yeah,
addendum, so-
No, it did. And the thought process was very simply this. We have different constituencies. We have the select board and the FinCom, and then we have the community. And I figured the narrative body, at least with respect to the tables, addressed the community, because a lot of people don't want to dig into the details. If it's important enough to them, they'll ask. Hold that thought for a moment. The next constituency was I take as a group, which is FinCom and Select Board. And for that, we have a mix of people too. Some persons are involved and they know the details, they don't need the details. Some of them are fine with not having the details. They want the overall numbers, they want to look at trends, they want to look at different aspects of it. The report satisfies both parties. And then to back up to community members who want the details, this also serves them because it's in that level, it's in the appendix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A, B, and C. I did think, I originally started by putting together exactly what you're saying, so it was basically a narrative. And then it was a more simplified version of the data, very similar to what finance presents to the select board and FinCom, October, November, December. It didn't have any utility. It didn't address the 3 members on the FinCom and the 1 member on the select board who had a question. And frankly, the process being at what it is because we get through with our reviews typically in like November of the department heads, and then we get into the Rorys, and then we can't write a report until January, mid-January, doesn't get presented to the end of January. I had to have all that information in my head or in front of me anyways.
Yeah.
Because the timeline between when it was fresh in my mind to when someone would ask you perhaps.
No, I had that on
project.
FinCom. People would
I
ask
remember
me in
that.
April and I'm like, what, did we approve that?
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
oh,
remember.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of lapse in time, absolutely.
Yeah, so it kind of gelled organically that give a summary, give the details. Hopefully it answers a lot of questions. And if it doesn't, I know where in the report to look.
Yeah.
Because for me, I took it very seriously. I don't want Capcom to look like we're not doing our due diligence. So if I stand up there in January and I can't answer a question reasonably, it reflects poorly on not just me, but the committee, and I wasn't gonna have that.
Yeah.
So that was the
No, it
nature of
makes
it.
Yeah.
So if that helps you
No,
guys in
trust me, I worry
understanding.
about doing the Rorys now, because then I'm like, but what if I don't remember why I did the Rory that way 2 months from now when we're talking about them?
It-
You know what I mean?
Well, so the Rory that's where you have an opportunity to be subjective.
Or something might.
No,
Something might come
something
up
might-
that alter your score or something, might be,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know, there's some,
they might
some,
change their request, which does happen. I mean,
Oh, that reminds me, I've got to speak to Barry. I'm gonna have to
the
onboard
airport
him on
changes
the
their requests a lot.
use of the Rory. It's coming into.
Oh, he doesn't know how to do that yet?
No.
Oh,
And then, ultimately, what I'd like to incorporate is the funding sources into the Rory.
mhm.
So that'd
That's
be-
what I would be,
Yeah.
that'd be amazing for me. Because to
And-
me, that priority mark is really important if it's a priority for them, and then. Of course, who's
And
paying
that
for
will
it.
rejigger
Even
the
if it doesn't
values
have
of
to
all
be
the
an-
rest. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be I'm not suggesting it's not worthwhile, it's just. We haven't had an opportunity to do it with, Rick came on board. Became familiar with the process.
Yeah,
He's since moved on to, assistant town manager. Sue's on board. She needs to become familiar with the process.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that. At the culmination of that, we'll be in a position where we can mature the Rory. And at the same time, each of the different categories, a little thing when you hover over your mouse, it pops up with a little reminder definition of what it's meant to be.
mhm.
Things that make it institutionally easier for people to come in and pick up after the fact. When that stuff's done, I'm done.
Yeah.
See you later.
Well, it's fine. I do incorporate it when I'm filling out my
Yeah.
priority. I do think about that, like, how do I really.
But we've talked about like. From year to year, kind of wondering, well, when exactly was that category about? And so the idea is to solidify those. So there's still a little bit of a vision. We'll see how that works out over time. I don't want to be here any longer. I know you guys
Okay.
don't either. It's almost noon. How about a motion to adjourn?
So
Jill,
moved.
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I feel like I'm continuing asking the most remedial questions.
No,